Summer 1992. Fort Collins, Colorado hummed with the energy of youth and possibility. Colorado State University students filled the downtown bars, their laughter echoing off brick buildings while the Rocky Mountains stood sentinel in the distance. But beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful college town, something darker was about to unfold, something that would haunt the community for over 3 decades. Sarah Thompson, 21 years old with her whole life ahead of her, had spent that warm June evening at the river's edge, a popular bar where locals and students mingled under dim lights and the pulse of live music. She'd arrived with friends, settling into their usual corner booth, drinks flowing, conversation easy. But as the night wore on, tension crept into their group. Words were exchanged. Voices rose. Sarah, upset and seeking space, grabbed her denim jacket and pushed through the crowded bar toward the back exit. No one tried to stop her. She stepped out into the Colorado night, the doors swinging shut behind her, cutting off the noise and warmth. The parking lot behind the river's edge was poorly lit, shadows pooling between scattered vehicles. Beyond it stretched a network of dark roads, half-finished construction sites, and vacant lots, the growing pains of a town expanding toward the foothills. Sarah walked quickly, her frustration propelling her forward, her sneakers scuffing against gravel as she headed toward the residential area where she rented a small apartment near campus. Several patrons leaving the bar later that night remembered seeing a young woman walking alone, moving with purpose, disappearing into the darkness beyond the last streetlight. That image, Sarah's silhouette fading into shadow, would haunt them for years to come. It was the last confirmed sighting of Sarah Thompson alive. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, turn on a notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. When dawn broke the next morning and Sarah hadn't returned home, her roommate, Michelle, grew worried. Sarah wasn't the type to disappear without a word. Her bed was untouched. Her keys still hung on the hook by the door. Michelle called Sarah's parents, then her friends, then the bar. No one had heard from her. By mid-morning, Sarah's mother, Claire, was at the Fort Collins Police Department filing a missing person report, her hands trembling as she filled out the paperwork that would officially acknowledge her daughter's absence. The investigation launched immediately. Fort Collins in 1992 wasn't the sophisticated, technology-driven city it would become. There were no security cameras lining every street corner, no cell phone GPS tracking, no digital footprints to follow. Investigators relied on old-fashioned police work, witness statements, physical searches, and instinct honed through years of experience. Detective Michael Brennan took the lead. A 20-year veteran with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much, Brennan assembled a timeline from the fragments people remembered. Sarah had arrived at the river's edge around 8 in the evening. The argument that sent her storming out occurred sometime after 11. She'd left through the back exit, crossing the parking lot alone. From there, the most logical route to her apartment would have taken her along Riverside Drive, a poorly lit two-lane road bordered by construction sites and empty lots awaiting development. Search teams mobilized within hours. Volunteers joined police officers in sweeping the area, calling Sarah's name into the warm summer air, hoping for a response that never came. They checked every alley, every ditch, every shadowed corner along that dark stretch of road. On the second day, a search dog caught a scent near an old construction site about half a mile from the bar. The team converged on the area, spreading out through the rough terrain of scattered building materials and rutted earth. That's when they found the first piece of evidence, a single white sneaker lying on its side in soft dirt near an unfinished foundation. Sarah's roommate confirmed it matched the shoes Sarah had been wearing that night. White canvas sneakers with a distinctive blue stripe along the sole. The shoe showed signs of having been forcibly removed, the laces still tied, as if Sarah's foot had been pulled from it rather than her taking it off voluntarily. 50 feet away, Snagged on the thorny branches of a scrub oak, investigators discovered a torn piece of faded denim. The fabric matched the description of Sarah's jacket, the same jacket multiple witnesses remembered her wearing as she left the bar. The tear was jagged, showing signs of force, as if the jacket had been grabbed and ripped during a struggle. The third piece of evidence surfaced near a pile of concrete blocks. A crumpled receipt from the river's edge, dated that very night, the timestamp showing 11:43 p.m. Sarah's signature was scrawled at the bottom where she'd closed out her tab before leaving. 3 pieces of evidence scattered across a construction site, each telling a fragment of a terrible story. But no Sarah, no body, no witnesses to whatever had happened in those dark, isolated minutes after she left the bar. Detective Brennan stood at the scene as the sun set on the second day of searching, casting long shadows across the construction site. The evidence suggested Sarah had come this way, had encountered something or someone that caused her belongings to scatter, had perhaps fought back. But where was she? And what had happened after that struggle? The investigation shifted into high gear. Every person at the river's edge that night was interviewed. Bartenders, servers, patrons, the live band. Anyone who might have seen something, noticed someone, remembered a detail that could crack the case open. One witness, a college student named Jennifer Martinez, recalled seeing a man standing near the back parking lot as she left the bar around midnight. She described him as tall, heavy-set, wearing a dark jacket despite the warm summer night. He'd been standing near a pickup truck, partially obscured by shadows, and something about him had made her uneasy enough to walk quickly to her car and lock the doors immediately. Another witness, a line cook taking a smoke break behind the bar, corroborated the sighting. He'd noticed the same man earlier in the evening, not inside the bar, but lurking near the back in trance, almost as if watching the exit. The cook hadn't thought much of it at the time. People waited for friends outside all the time, but now the memory took on sinister significance. The physical description was maddeningly vague. Tall, heavy-set, dark clothing, possibly in his 30s or 40s. It could have described hundreds of men in Fort Collins. But it was something. Detective Brennan had composite sketches drawn up and distributed throughout the city, plastered on telephone poles and shop windows, printed in the local newspaper alongside Sarah's smiling photo. The investigation also turned its focus to Sarah's personal life. Her boyfriend, Tyler Matthews, had been at the river's edge that night. He was part of the friend group Sarah had been with, and according to multiple witnesses, he'd been involved in the argument that led to Sarah leaving. Tyler, a 23-year-old CSU student studying engineering, became an immediate person of interest. Detective Brennan brought Tyler in for questioning. The young man was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he recounted the events of that night. Yes, they'd argued. Yes, he'd said things he regretted. But he insisted he hadn't followed Sarah out. He'd stayed at the bar for another 20 minutes, trying to calm down, finishing his drink. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Tyler inside the bar well after Sarah left. He'd eventually walked home in the opposite direction from Sarah's apartment, arriving at his own place around 1 in the morning. His roommate confirmed the timeline. Still, protocol demanded thorough investigation. Tyler voluntarily provided a DNA sample, submitted to a polygraph test, and cooperated fully with every request. The polygraph came back clean. More importantly, when the lab analyzed the biological evidence collected from Sarah's torn jacket and the inside of her sneaker, they found traces of male DNA, epithelial cells left behind during what appeared to be a violent encounter. The lab ran the sample against Tyler's DNA. It wasn't a match. Tyler Matthews was cleared, but the DNA result created a new mystery. If not Tyler, then who? Who was the man whose biological traces were found on Sarah's belongings? In 1992, DNA technology was still in its relative infancy. The lab could determine gender and some basic genetic markers, but creating a detailed profile or searching a database wasn't yet feasible. The sample was carefully preserved, logged, and stored. Potential evidence waiting for technology to catch up with possibility. As summer turned to fall, the investigation began to lose momentum. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated, every possible scenario explored. Detectives tracked down former boyfriends, interviewed co-workers from the campus bookstore where Sarah worked part-time, questioned neighbors and classmates. They found nothing sinister, no enemies, no stalkers, no reason anyone would want to harm Sarah Thompson. The man seen near the parking lot was never identified. Despite the composite sketches and public appeals, no one came forward with a name. He remained a shadow figure, possibly connected, possibly just a bystander whose presence that night was mere coincidence. The burned pickup truck discovery came 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance. Firefighters responding to a vehicle fire on a remote Forest Service road 20 miles outside Fort Collins found a charred Ford F-150 burned so thoroughly that the VIN was barely recoverable. The fire was ruled suspicious. Accelerant had been used. But the truck's registration had lapsed years earlier, and tracing the owner proved impossible. The vehicle had changed hands multiple times through private sales, none properly documented. It was another dead end, another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. By winter, Sarah Thompson's case had gone cold. The file sat on Detective Brennan's desk, a constant reminder of failure, until it was finally boxed up and moved to the cold case storage room, where dozens of other unsolved mysteries gathered dust. Sarah's family held vigils. Her mother, Claire, refused to give up hope, calling the police department weekly, then monthly, then just on Sarah's birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. The years passed. Life moved on, as it always does, even when hearts remain frozen in grief. But Fort Collins didn't forget. The case became local legend, whispered about in dorm rooms and discussed in late-night conversations. Sarah's disappearance changed the town, made young women more cautious, made parents more protective, left a scar on the community's sense of safety. Her room in her parents' house remained exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to a life interrupted, hope preserved in stasis. Detective Brennan retired in 2008, the Sarah Thompson case still haunting him. He'd worked hundreds of cases over his career, solved most of them, but Sarah was the one that got away. He thought about her often, wondered where she was, what had happened in those dark minutes after she left the bar, whether justice would ever come. It took a wildfire to provide the answer. The summer of 2024 burned hotter than anyone could remember. Colorado was experiencing one of its worst drought years on record, and lightning strikes had sparked multiple wildfires across the state. In late July, a massive blaze ignited in Poudre Canyon, 25 miles northwest of Fort Collins. The Elkhorn Fire, as it came to be called, consumed thousands of acres, driven by fierce winds and tinder-dry conditions. Firefighters worked around the clock, establishing containment lines, conducting backburns, saving what structures they could. In the fire's aftermath, crews moved through the scorched landscape, checking for hot spots, ensuring no hidden embers could reignite the inferno. It was during one of these mop-up operations that a firefighter named Marcus Rivera made a discovery that would change everything. On a remote hillside, where the fire had burned particularly hot, Marcus noticed something unusual protruding from the ash-covered ground. At first, he thought it might be an animal bone. Elk or deer sometimes perished in wildfires. But as he knelt for a closer look, training and instinct told him this was something else entirely. This was human. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office was contacted immediately. The area was secured, and forensic teams were dispatched to the scene. What they uncovered over the next several days painted a grim picture. The remains were skeletal, scattered across the hillside, clearly having been there for many years before the fire exposed them. Fragments of clothing clung to some bones, faded denim, a metal button, the twisted remains of a zipper. The forensic anthropologist brought in to examine the remains determined they belonged to a young adult female, approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, deceased for at least 2 decades based on the state of decomposition and environmental factors. There were no signs of burial. The body had apparently lain exposed on this remote hillside all these years, slowly being reclaimed by nature until fires stripped away the concealing vegetation. The denim fragments were the key. When the evidence was photographed and analyzed, investigators noticed something significant. The fabric matched the description of Sarah Thompson's jacket from 1992. Further comparison with the piece of torn denim collected from the construction site 32 years earlier showed a perfect match. The tear patterns aligned exactly, like puzzle pieces finally reunited. Dental records sealed the identification. Sarah Thompson's dental chart, carefully preserved in her missing person file, matched the teeth recovered from the skull. After 32 years, Sarah had been found. The discovery sent shockwaves through Fort Collins. The case that had haunted the community for decades was suddenly active again, no longer a missing person investigation, but a homicide. And this time, technology had caught up with justice. The cold case unit of the Fort Collins Police Department, now led by Detective Amanda Reeves, immediately reopened the file. The first order of business was to retrieve all the physical evidence collected in 1992 and submit it for modern DNA analysis. Technology had evolved dramatically since the early 90s. What had once been impossible, creating a detailed genetic profile from microscopic skin cells, was now routine. The denim fabric, the sneaker, the receipt, all were carefully unsealed in a sterile laboratory environment. Forensic technicians extracted DNA from the surfaces most likely to contain biological traces. The process was meticulous, each step documented, each sample handled with extreme care to prevent contamination. When the results came back, they confirmed what the original 1992 analysis had indicated. The presence of male DNA, foreign to Sarah, left on her belongings at the time of the incident. But now, with modern STR analysis, the lab could create a complete genetic profile, 20 distinct markers that served as a unique biological fingerprint. The profile was immediately uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contained genetic data from millions of convicted offenders and crime scene evidence across the United States. If the man whose DNA was on Sarah's jacket had ever been arrested and required to provide a sample, CODIS would identify him within seconds. The system returned no matches. Disappointment settled over the investigative team, but it wasn't the end of the road. Detective Reeves had been following the emerging field of forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that had begun solving cold cases across the country by using commercial DNA databases to identify suspects through distant relatives. The method was controversial, raising privacy concerns, but it was also remarkably effective. Cases that had been cold for 40, 50, even 60 years were being solved by tracing genetic connections through family trees built from DNA matches on platforms like GeneMatch, where users voluntarily uploaded their genetic data. With departmental approval and legal clearance, the Fort Collins Police Department partnered with a specialized genetic genealogy firm. Sarah's case became their priority project. The male DNA profile was converted to the SNP format used by genealogy databases and uploaded to GeneMatch. The analysis began immediately. The system compared Sarah's attacker's DNA against hundreds of thousands of user profiles, looking for shared genetic segments that indicated family relationships. The process was painstaking, requiring expertise in both genetics and genealogy. Weak matches were investigated first, establishing the outer branches of the family tree. Stronger matches helped narrow the focus. After 6 weeks of intensive analysis, the genetic genealogist assigned to the case, Dr. Patricia Chun, identified a cluster of DNA matches all originating from a family line in western Colorado. The matches weren't close, third and fourth cousins, separated by multiple generations, but they were consistent. They all shared characteristic genetic segments with the unknown male. Dr. Chen began constructing a family tree, working backward from the DNA matches to find common ancestors. Birth records, marriage licenses, census data, obituaries, every available document was examined to build the genealogical structure. The work led her to a large family that had settled in Grand Junction in the 1950s, with branches eventually spreading to other parts of Colorado, including Fort Collins. As the tree took shape, Dr. Chun identified males of the right age who would have been adults in 1992. The list started with dozens of names, but was systematically reduced through geographical analysis, eliminating those who could be definitively placed outside Colorado at the time of Sarah's disappearance, those who were too young or too old, those who had died before 1992. Eventually, one name emerged as the most compelling candidate: Robert James Caldwell. Born in Grand Junction in 1967, Caldwell would have been 25 in 1992. Records showed he'd moved to Fort Collins in the late 80s, taking various manual labor jobs, construction, landscaping, equipment operation. His employment history was spotty, marked by frequent job changes and gaps that suggested a transient lifestyle. Most significantly, tax records indicated Caldwell had been working for a construction company in Fort Collins during the summer of 1992. More specifically, he'd been part of a crew working on a residential development project. The construction site where Sarah's shoe and jacket fragment were found wasn't that development, but it was less than 2 miles away. Caldwell would have known the area intimately: the dark roads, the vacant lots, the isolated spots where someone could easily disappear. Detective Reeves felt the pieces clicking into place, but she needed more than circumstantial evidence and genetic probability. She needed Caldwell's actual DNA to compare directly with the 1992 sample. The problem was approach. Caldwell still lived in Fort Collins, now 57 years old, working as a maintenance supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. He had no criminal record beyond a few traffic violations, nothing that would have put his DNA in Cody's. He'd lived in the community for over 35 years, hiding in plain sight. Surveillance began immediately. Detective Reeves assigned a team to monitor Caldwell's movements, looking for an opportunity to obtain a discarded DNA sample legally. In Colorado, as in most states, DNA from items a person voluntarily abandons in public, a cigarette, but a coffee cup, a discarded napkin, can be collected without a warrant. The team followed Caldwell for 3 days, documenting his routine. Home to work, work to home, occasional stops at a convenience store or fast food restaurant. He was methodical, almost boring in his predictability. On the 4th day, opportunity presented itself. Caldwell stopped at a gas station on his way home from work, purchased a fountain drink, and consumed it while pumping gas. When he finished fueling up, he tossed the cup into a trash receptacle and drove away. 2 minutes later, investigators retrieved the cup, carefully bagging it as evidence. The rim and straw were covered in saliva, more than enough for DNA extraction and analysis. The cup was rushed to the laboratory. Forensic technicians extracted DNA from the saliva, amplified it, and ran a complete STR profile. The results were then compared to the male DNA from Sarah's 1992 evidence. Every single marker matched, 20 out of 20. The statistical probability of the match being coincidental was essentially 0, 1 in several quintillion. Robert James Caldwell's DNA was on Sarah Thompson's jacket and shoe from the night she disappeared. Detective Reeves sat in her office, staring at the report, feeling the weight of 32 years of waiting finally culminate in this moment. They had him. After more than 3 decades, Sarah Thompson's killer had been identified with scientific certainty. An arrest warrant was prepared, charging Robert James Caldwell with first-degree murder. The case was presented to the district attorney, who reviewed the evidence and approved prosecution. DNA evidence, geographical proximity, timeline alignment, genetic genealogy confirmation. The case was solid. On a crisp October morning, Detective Reeves and a team of officers arrived at Caldwell's workplace with the warrant. He was on a manufacturing floor when they approached, wearing coveralls, a tool belt around his waist, looking like any other working-class Colorado nearing retirement. When Detective Reeves identified herself and informed him he was under arrest for the murder of Sarah Thompson, Caldwell's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes told a different story. They held recognition, fear, and something else. Resignation, perhaps, as if he'd always known this day might come. He was handcuffed, read his rights, and escorted from the building while his co-workers watched in stunned silence. The news spread through Fort Collins like wildfire, faster and more devastating than the blaze that had exposed Sarah's remains. Robert Caldwell, a man who'd lived among them for decades, who'd attended community events, who'd been just another face in the crowd, was Sarah Thompson's killer. The betrayal cut deep. Caldwell had been in Fort Collins the entire time. He'd been there when search parties combed the city looking for Sarah. He'd been there during the vigils, the memorials, the anniversary gatherings. He'd watched Sarah's family grieve, had seen the missing person posters with her smiling face plastered on every street corner, and he'd said nothing, done nothing, just continued living his life as if he hadn't taken hers. The interrogation was conducted by Detective Reeves and her partner, Detective James Morton. They laid out the evidence methodically, the DNA match, the genetic genealogy, his presence in Fort Collins in '92, his familiarity with the area where Sarah's belongings were found. Caldwell initially denied everything, claiming mistaken identity, suggesting the DNA must have been contaminated or transferred innocently. But when presented with the statistical impossibility of the DNA match being coincidental, when shown the complete timeline and the mountain of circumstantial evidence supporting his presence at the scene, Caldwell's denials became weaker. He requested an attorney and the interrogation ended, but the damage was done. His story was falling apart under the weight of science. The trial began in the spring of 2025, 33 years after Sarah Thompson walked out of the river's edge and into darkness. The Larimer County Courthouse was packed every day, the gallery filled with media, true crime enthusiasts, and Fort Collins residents seeking answers that had eluded them for decades. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Karen Sheffield, built their case on 3 pillars: DNA evidence, circumstantial evidence, and opportunity. The DNA testimony was devastating. Dr. Raymond Foster, the forensic scientist who'd conducted the analysis, walked the jury through every step of the process. He explained how DNA is transferred through physical contact, how epithelial cells from skin remain viable on surfaces for years, how modern STR analysis can create a genetic fingerprint unique to each individual. The DNA found on Sarah Thompson's clothing in 1992, Dr. Foster testified, matches Robert Caldwell's DNA with absolute certainty. The probability of this match being anyone other than Mr. Caldwell is 1 in several quintillion, a number so large it exceeds the population of Earth by trillions. To put it simply, it's his DNA. Period. The genetic genealogy evidence was presented next. Dr. Patricia Chun explained how she'd used distant relatives' DNA to construct a family tree leading directly to Caldwell. The jury listened intently as she described the painstaking process of building genealogies, eliminating candidates, and narrowing the field until only Caldwell remained. The defense, led by Public Defender Thomas Harrigan, attempted to challenge the reliability of genetic genealogy, arguing it was too new, too untested, too prone to error. But the prosecution countered with case after case where the technique had been validated. The Golden State Killer, numerous John and Jane Doe identifications, dozens of cold cases solved with genetic genealogy, providing leads that were then confirmed through direct DNA comparison. Circumstantial evidence filled in the narrative gaps. Caldwell's employment records placed him in Fort Collins working construction during the summer of 1992. Co-workers from that time were tracked down and interviewed. Several remembered Caldwell as a loner, someone who kept to himself, occasionally displayed a temper, and had an unsettling way of watching women. One former coworker testified that Caldwell had frequented the river's edge in '92, often going there after work shifts. The prosecution presented evidence of Caldwell's familiarity with the area where Sarah's belongings were scattered. He'd worked on construction sites throughout that part of Fort Collins, knew the back roads, the isolated spots, the places where someone could dispose of evidence or a body without being seen. Jennifer Martinez, now in her 50s, testified about the man she'd seen lurking near the parking lot behind the river's edge that night. When shown a photograph of Caldwell from 1992, she couldn't make a definitive identification. Too many years had passed, the memory was too hazy, but she confirmed the build and general appearance were consistent. The defense's strategy focused on reasonable doubt. They emphasized that no one had actually witnessed Caldwell with Sarah that night. They pointed out that the DNA evidence, while compelling, didn't prove murder, only contact. They suggested alternative scenarios. Perhaps Caldwell had encountered Sarah innocently, helped her after she fell, his DNA transferring during a benign interaction. Perhaps she died accidentally and he'd panicked, moving her body but not actually killing her. But the prosecution dismantled these theories systematically. Sarah's belongings scattered across a construction site suggested violence, not a casual encounter. The fact that her body was found miles away on a remote hillside indicated deliberate concealment, not panic after an accident. And most damning of all, Caldwell had remained silent for 32 years. Innocent people don't hide. Innocent people come forward. The most emotional testimony came from Sarah's family. Her mother, Claire, now 78 and visibly frail, took the stand and described 3 decades of grief, of not knowing, of hoping against hope that someday Sarah would walk through the door. She spoke of birthdays marked by absence, of holidays shadowed by loss, of growing old without her daughter. Every day, for 32 years, Claire testified, her voice breaking. I wondered if Sarah was alive somewhere, maybe suffering from amnesia, maybe being held against her will. Part of me held on to hope, even when logic said there was none. And she pointed at Caldwell. He knew. He knew the whole time and said nothing. He let us suffer in that uncertainty when he could have at least given us the dignity of knowing the truth. Sarah's younger sister Rachel, who'd been only 17 when Sarah disappeared, testified about the shadow the case had cast over her entire adult life. She'd become a victim's advocate, dedicating her career to helping families of missing persons, driven by the unresolved grief of her sister's disappearance. Now, finally, there was resolution. Painful, terrible resolution, but resolution nonetheless. The defense called only a few witnesses, primarily character references attesting to Caldwell's good behavior over the past 3 decades. A neighbor described him as quiet and helpful. His supervisor of the manufacturing plant testified that he'd been a reliable employee for over 20 years. But these testimonials fell hollow against the weight of scientific evidence and 32 years of deception. Caldwell himself never testified. His attorney advised against it, knowing the prosecution would eviscerate him on cross-examination. So he sat silently at the defense table throughout the trial, his face a mask, giving away nothing. The closing arguments crystallized the case. Deputy D.A. Sheffield stood before the jury and laid it out plainly. Robert Caldwell's DNA is on Sarah Thompson's clothing from the night she disappeared. He was in Fort Collins that summer, working in the exact area where her belongings were found. He had access, opportunity, and for 32 years, he maintained silence while a family suffered unimaginable grief. The science doesn't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. The only person lying in this courtroom is the defendant. The defense's closing was weaker, relying on technical arguments about DNA transfer and emphasizing the lack of eyewitnesses. But the jury wasn't buying it. After 3 weeks of testimony and mountains of evidence, they retired to deliberate. The verdict came back in less than 6 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Sarah's mother collapsed in tears, held up by her daughter Rachel. Members of the community who'd attended every day of the trial wept openly. Detective Reeves, sitting in the front row, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Not just her own burden, but the burden carried by Detective Brennan before her, by all the investigators who'd worked this case over 3 decades, by the entire Fort Collins community. Robert James Caldwell showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, as bailiffs moved to secure him. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, noting the particularly heinous nature of the crime and the decades Caldwell had evaded justice, imposed the maximum sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before pronouncing sentence, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Claire Thompson, using a walker to approach the podium, spoke directly to Caldwell. "You took my daughter from me," she said, her voice stronger than her frail body suggested possible. "You took 32 years during which I could have mourned properly, grieved honestly, and found peace. Instead, you let us live in limbo, in torture, while you went about your life as if nothing had happened. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life thinking about what you did. I hope Sarah's face haunts your dreams the way her absence has haunted mine." Caldwell was remanded to custody and transferred to the Colorado State Penitentiary, where he would spend the remainder of his life. As he was led from the courtroom, one question remained unanswered. Why? What had happened that night in June 1992? Had Caldwell known Sarah, or was she a random victim who'd simply crossed his path at the wrong moment? Had he planned it, or was it an impulse acted upon in darkness? These questions might never be fully answered. Caldwell maintained his silence, refusing to provide details, denying responsibility even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Some mysteries remain even when justice is served. But for Fort Collins, for Sarah's family, for everyone who'd carried the weight of this unsolved case for 3 decades, there was finally closure. Sarah Thompson could be properly laid to rest. Her killer was behind bars. The truth, delayed for so long, had finally emerged from the ashes. The Sarah Thompson case became a watershed moment in the true crime community and in law enforcement circles. It demonstrated the power of perseverance, evidence carefully preserved for decades, finally yielding answers when technology caught up. It showcased the revolutionary potential of forensic genetic genealogy, a tool that was solving cold cases at an unprecedented rate. Within months of Caldwell's conviction, police departments across Colorado and throughout the United States began reviewing their own cold case files, looking for cases with preserved DNA evidence that could be reanalyzed with modern techniques. Dozens of cases were reopened. Families who'd given up hope were contacted. New investigations launched. The case also sparked important conversations about the ethics of using commercial DNA databases for law enforcement purposes. Privacy advocates raised concerns about the implications of genetic surveillance. But most people, especially victims' families, felt the benefits outweighed the risks. If submitting DNA to a genealogy website meant helping solve a murder, bring a killer to justice, give a family closure, wasn't that a worthwhile trade-off? For the Fort Collins community, healing could finally begin. The shadow that had hung over the town since 1992 started to lift. The fear that had gripped residents, the suspicion that had turned neighbor against neighbor, could fade into memory. The truth, however terrible, was better than decades of uncertainty. Sarah's family established a scholarship fund in her name at Colorado State University, helping young women pursue their dreams the way Sarah never got to complete hers. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, now also the anniversary of justice served, they hold a memorial not of mourning, but of celebration, celebrating Sarah's life, celebrating the truth, celebrating the persistence that led to answers. Detective Reeves kept a photo of Sarah Thompson on her desk, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as inspiration for the work still to be done. There were other cold cases waiting, other families seeking answers, other truths buried, but not gone forever. The wildfire that exposed Sarah's remains was tragic, destructive, devastating to the Colorado landscape. But from those ashes rose justice. From that destruction came truth. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, even when hope seems lost, light can still break through. Secrets buried for decades can still be unearthed. Justice delayed is still justice when it finally arrives. Sarah Thompson's story is one of loss that lingered for a generation, perseverance that refused to accept defeat, betrayal hidden in plain sight, and ultimately, truth emerging from flames both literal and metaphorical. It's a testament to the families who never stopped fighting, the investigators who never closed the file, the scientists who keep pushing technology forward, and the communities that refuse to forget. Some cases go cold, but they never truly die. Not as long as someone remembers, someone cares, someone keeps searching for truth. Sarah Thompson's case proves that even after 32 years, even when all hope seems lost, justice can still prevail. And that's a message worth remembering. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice can prevail even in the coldest of cases, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like Sarah's. These cases, these victims, deserve to be remembered, to have their stories told, to know that we haven't forgotten. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case. Do you think forensic genealogy is the future of solving cold cases? What other unsolved mysteries would you like us to cover? And please, share this video with someone who loves true crime, with someone who believes in justice, with someone who needs to be reminded that the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how long it takes. Every share, every like, every comment helps these forgotten stories reach more people, keeps these cases in the public consciousness, and reminds law enforcement that we're watching, we care, and we demand answers. Together, we can make sure that no victim is forgotten, no case stays cold forever, and no killer can hide indefinitely. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next case.